Welcome to Costly Conversations. I'm super excited because we have the Olivia Rondeau on the show with us today. What's going on, Olivia?
I am good. I'm happy to be here, and thank you for having me on your podcast.
Oh, absolutely. Thank you so much for saying yes. I know you're very busy with all sorts of guest appearances here, there, everywhere. Tim Pool, Kennedy on Fox Business.
Yes.
What is she on? And you know, you're doing things. You're going places. You're super young, so it's super exciting to kind of meet somebody who's young and doing things and going places, not just sitting on their butt playing Fortnite. So definitely super excited to have you on the show to talk about stuff that we kind of want to talk about. Real quick, just a quick order of business. I want to encourage everybody to go ahead, if you're watching a video or podcast, like it, share it, do all the different things that you're supposed to do with podcasts to help support, because word of mouth is all we got. And of course, if you want to support the show, best way, check the links down below for sponsors and of course the Patreon. Now onto the show. Olivia, could you tell us a little bit about you? I know I mentioned that you kind of do this and you do a little bit of that, but can you tell us a little bit about you, just what you're doing lately?
Sure. So I consider myself to be kind of a lot of things. I'll call myself a conservatarian, which is somewhere in the middle of a conservative libertarian for people who don't know. I do some activism. I do some political work on campaigns. I do some journalism. I do some commentary. I do a lot. I do basically everything there is in electoral politics and political media. I've done in like some type of capacity. So people always ask me, like, what do you want to do? Do you want to run for office? I'm just like, I don't really know. I kind of like helping wherever I can and getting the message out that I believe in wherever I can. So that's just kind of my goal for right now. Yeah, as you said, I've been on a bunch of different shows just talking about messages and opinions and policies I believe in, especially last year in 2021. That really took off for me more than working in electoral politics, because before that I was mainly working on different political campaigns and things like that. But I kind of blew up on Twitter first, and then my other social media pages started to grow, and then I got asked to, write op-eds and go on interviews and such and such. So that's kind of how I got here and what I do.
Okay. Well, thank you for kind of giving us the breakdown. What people may not know, or if they've been following you, they know, you're not even 21 just yet, are you?
Next week.
Next week, as of recording, we're still in January. As of recording, you're still 20, so you're super young. You got started basically like right out of high school, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I was still in high school. I made a Twitter in 2018 and I graduated high school in 2019. So
yeah,
I hit 10K when I was like a junior in high school still. And
that's incredible.
it was a little bit crazy at the time. I definitely made a lot of mistakes back then. And I would honestly, looking back on it now, I'm just like, damn, we probably shouldn't be giving a lot of teenagers a platform. That's why I'm like so against like these Greta Thunberg types, because I feel like every kid, even if you really believe in what you're saying, because at the time I really believed in what I was saying, every kid is going to say things that, they regret or that are misinformed, and probably just shouldn't be online for, adults to read on a public page with thousands and thousands and thousands of followers, So that's one thing I do have to say about my age, and that's one thing that is kind of negative aspect, because people often ask me how I got started so young, and I kind of wouldn't recommend it. I would have waited till I would have waited till I turned 18 if I could do it again, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to put anybody down because of their age, simply because we have a lot of people who are able to gain a lot of maturity early, maybe earlier than normal. But obviously, as you go on in life, you do pick up a little bit more than you would have a few years ago, especially scientifically, your brain's still developing, XYZ,
right.
Just that kind of stuff. But I think we're about 5 minutes in. I'm pretty sure our audience is like, normally Costly Conversations, we usually talk about like firearms related stuff. Olivia, she's not exactly like a firearms person. I'm sure you're not scared of the topic necessarily. Well, why is she on the show? And I'll just go ahead and answer it here. Really, I asked you on because I do want to not shift the focus, but remind the focus that, the show Cost of Conversations is about talking about things that are difficult, about things that go untouched, about things that get ignored by traditional media and even your family members. And, obviously for me, my values, number one value is family. And so if we're talking about things that impact my family, I think we should talk about it. So that being said, oftentimes, but not always, politics impacts your family dynamics. And it can ultimately, depending on how you're voting and things like that, it can impact the way your life turns out overall. Hopefully not too much, but it can. What do you have to say about that? Do you agree? Do you disagree? Or where are we with you?
I agree with you, and I also agree with the point that family is to be valued, and it's the most important thing. I feel like I get along with people more when they are strong family people and support their family and view them as valuable. And I think there's something to be said, like morally. I think that in general, America would be better if, the family structure was put back into focus, and just a lot of things could be improved by that. And sometimes when I'm in politics too much, that vision kind of gets away from me. Definitely could tell it gets away from a lot of different people, which is why lately I've been a little bit disenchanted with the rat race that is DC politics. I kind of want to get out of here soon. Just because people really don't value family, people really don't have any core values anymore, just by the nature of the city of DC. And that's just really disheartening.
Yeah, definitely. I always kind of think about it. I'm like, okay, so why are firearms important to me and to my viewership and the people who support me? And I say, well, because it's the most effective tool to protect your family and yourself from immediate threats and danger. And that's why we care about taking our family to the range and things like that. So definitely 100%. We're all about family here. And ultimately, we're all about family, even though we talk about this and this and that and culture and black culture and things we can do to improve the community. If we're talking about improving the community, we're talking about improving the thing that our family exists in. If we're talking about improving politics, we're talking about the thing that can sometimes legislate the way our family moves about in public. So that's why we're having this conversation. Just for anybody who's confused, that's why we're here. So let's get talking. Can we talk a little bit about your writing career? Because you're 20 years old, super freaking young, but you've been doing a little bit of writing. Who have you been writing for, and how did you get into it?
So I have always had a passion for writing since I was very young. Like anytime we would have like creative writing in elementary school, I would always write pages and pages and pages. And I would not finish in the allotted like 30 minutes time. So I'd bring it home and just keep writing just for myself. And so I really trained myself to write pretty much anything. I write like nonfiction, fictional stories, really anything. And then through middle and high school, I was in the magnet program for humanities and communication. So that was a lot of writing too. So I've just always been very passionate, and it's always, been one of my abilities that I've, kind of cultivated throughout my entire life, which I'm kind of proud of. So when I first wanted to get into political writing, of course, on Twitter, it's so hard to get your thoughts across with like the character limit. So I immediately wanted to
Mm-hmm.
start publishing things that were more long form. So what I would do is, I had a bunch of followers on Twitter, and some of my followers ran like, political blogs, and I would just write a little piece for their blog, for free, like nothing like as a job. I just wanted to be able to explain my tweets and explain my opinions better and host it on a blog or a website where I know people would read it. So there was a couple smaller websites. There was like Porter Medium I wrote for a while. That was a startup that really never took off per se, I don't think. But that was like one of the first places I would write news and opinion for. And after basically forcing everyone to read my work because I was posting on Twitter all the time and just tweeting about it all the time, and sending it to different publications all the time, I got an internship at the Daily Caller, and I started contributing to like a couple like C-list conservative websites like Lone Conservative, Campus Reform, kind of on that tier. And I from there I just kind of like worked up to, I guess now I'm at B-list. I haven't written from like a super big website yet, I don't think, but I get paid more, so that's cool.
So writing articles, like you just said, you do get paid. Like, I'm not going to ask you specific numbers, but is it? Do you feel like it's worth your time? I don't know if I'm putting
Yes.
you in a bad spot by asking that.
No, I mean, it's worth my time now because now I've made a name for myself. So I've been able to raise my rate for op-eds and things like that.
Good deal. Yeah, I think it's really interesting because as I think there's quite a few like small business owners and like Second Amendment entrepreneurs that kind of will tune in from time to time on my show. That's a lot of my friend group nowadays are these people, and it's like, man, like raising your rate and be kind of being self-sufficient and self-employed. Are you considered self-employed? Or are you employees of these organizations or
So
contractors?
currently, I am not a full-time employee anywhere. I do a lot of freelancing. I've done contracts here and there. So I had a 6-month contract where I was a staff writer at Foundation of Economic Education, or FEE. So and when I was intern at the Daily Caller, I was writing full time there, and then they had me on as a contributor after the internship ended. So I did keep working there, but for the last couple months, I mean, certain publications pay me enough to the point where I haven't needed a full time job just per article. But I recently did accept a position with a political consulting firm, so I'll probably still do a lot of freelance writing with Timcast and a couple other places. Hannah Cox and Brad Palumbo, they just announced their new website, Based Politics, and asked me to contribute there. And a couple other websites I'm still probably going to write for occasionally. But now I'm going to start a full time job in February. So we'll see if I have a lot of time.
Hey, well, best of luck to you in those endeavors. Let's talk about something kind of interesting for just a second. Not our main topics, but I'm curious. Just talking about you still. For a lot of the times when you see young people like in political spaces moving about, I know you called yourself more of like a conservatarian, which is a mix up between like libertarian and conservative values with whatever else you choose to put in there. Um, in my opinion, or from what I've seen, I've seen like a lot of more like liberal, left leaning young people who are active and like ready to rock and roll in the political space. I don't know that I know or have seen too many um, young conservatives, rather, except for maybe a few notable ones. Can you explain that? Like, where do you feel like you fit in with that? Were you one thing and then you became the other? Or how did that happen?
I was never like a liberal activist or journalist per se. I would say like I was definitely much more liberal in my early teen years, but I wasn't on like Twitter or social media or writing op-eds or anything about it. I was just a
Mm-hmm.
misinformed, seventh grader. So the whole time I've been really online and been like, I hate this, an influencer. I just want to throw up. But ever since then, I've been on the right, ever since then, I've been on the right. I've definitely gotten more libertarian, if anything, because when I first started off, I was under the impression that there was only two choices, red versus blue. So I was red.
Mm-hmm.
And then, as time went on, and I realized that Trump isn't the end all be all and the Republicans aren't the end all be all, then I started exploring other options. So I'm an independent. And in that space, there's like nobody because I feel like people, especially kids, want to latch onto an established movement so bad that all of the Gen Z like influencers or activists or what have you are part of like a big thing. You'll have like the big climate change activists or the big Black Lives Matter activists, or on the right you'll have like the big like Turning Point USA activists. It's already part of this big organization. Like they join groups that are already established. So for me, I'm kind of alone in that I don't really have a group or organization or something or even specific ideology that I ascribe to.
It almost sounds like joining a gang. Like,
It's definitely a gang, especially here, especially in the swamp. It definitely is joining a gang to the point where you can't even talk to people on the other side if you join their gang. So I just can't do it.
dang, that sounds rough in a manner of speaking. Obviously, there's things in life that are more complicated,
For
but
sure, but it's just a
yeah.
dirty thing, and I learned the hard way. I'm not saying I was never in any of those organizations or never got kind of sucked into the partisanship, but once you go through that and learn the hard way, you just never really want to put all these labels on yourself and limit yourself to only hanging around and conversing and agreeing with a group of people depending on your political party or your
Mm-hmm.
organization. or what your ideology, whether you just whether you're like 100% conservative or 100% liberal. I just can't really do that. So I've had a lot of people call me like, oh, she's a fake conservative, or she was just conservative for attention, and blah 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 blah. That was never the case. I was never like lying, when I said I was more conservative in the past and I'm more libertarian now. My kind of thoughts and feelings about certain issues just evolved, and I felt more comfortable to share them. So yeah.
Mm. No, that makes sense. And people, I do have, I would say, a few viewers and listeners who find themselves in the middle, but even some that will find themselves more on the left side of politics. And I generally try not to worry about sharing my own, just because it's like not really productive towards a conversation usually. But I'm curious for those people who would be like, oh, she calls herself conservative. Is she some sort of racist? Is she some sort of coon? XYZ. I know those are offensive terms.
No, but people definitely do have a preconceived notion about me before they even hear what I have to say. Because when people hear a Black conservative woman, they're like, oh, she probably exactly like Candace. She probably exactly like Candace, or she probably like Stacey Dash, or all these other people that nobody likes. And for better or for worse, the Black community does not really enjoy those people's talking points. I'll say that. And it's like nobody really cares to ask me how I feel about specific policies. If they ask me, do I think racism exists in this country? Yes. They do. If they ask me, do I think that African Americans or American descendants of slavery deserve reparations? I'll say yes, but nobody cares enough to ask me about it because they hear conservative and they're like, oh, she's Clarence Thomas. She's a coon. She's a sellout. So yeah.
No, that's interesting, and I'm glad you went ahead and just clarified that, because people want to know. People are like,
people always
Black conservative,
yeah,
Black conservative. So you voted for who, then clearly XYZ. You're this and you're that. Which, I feel kind of annoyed when I see stuff like that, just because my position in life is don't assume. Mainly because when I go to my shooting club, it's a Black gun club. And people would assume, oh, a bunch of Black people with guns, they must be conservative. Exactly the opposite. So you just can't assume. Now, with that being said, I suppose here's where we run into issues. Like you said earlier, people assume like, oh, she's just like Candace Owens, Stacey Dash, goes down the list of people who have rubbed the Black community the wrong way. And I'm not asking you to, I guess, dance for the Black community, but in what ways, other than, I suppose, the reparations and, does slavery exist? In what ways do you feel like your value set aligns with the mission of those in the Black community who really do want to uplift the Black community?
Well, I think I apply conservative principles through a pro-Black lens. So when we're talking about things such as gun control, I'll talk about through a pro-Black lens, saying that gun control disproportionately affects Black people. It's racist. I'm not sitting up here saying that Black culture is such a huge problem compared to what Black people have faced, as a result of the government and tyranny and racism. That's not to say that Black culture doesn't deserve some level of criticism, just like any culture does. But I'm not one of those people that's like, oh, it's hip hop's fault. You got to stop sagging your pants, and it's Black man's fault, and it's 13 do 50, and there's fatherless homes. Like, like I just don't ascribe to those talking points. I'll talk about things like the war on drugs, which a lot of conservatives will ignore because it doesn't really serve to fit their talking points that racism doesn't exist, or that policies that were made during racist and segregated times don't still affect people. Just because it doesn't say Black people serve longer for this on the law books doesn't mean that Black people don't serve longer for that. So there's a lot of things that I'll bring up that a lot of conservatives will get mad at me about because I come across as too pro-Black. I've had people call me like a hotep and stuff before. I like the hotep. Cool with the hoteps, most of them.
Yeah.
But that's not really a label I use to describe myself. So there's a couple things that set me apart from mainstream conservatives, I think, when it comes to race.
Okay. Yeah. Reason I really felt like we need to touch on that is I've noticed a lot of Black folks, even guys in the gun community, who maybe they actually have a lot of like really like conservative values, but they would never, ever, ever even sniff the term conservative. And I'm not saying that anybody needs to, because call yourself what you want to call yourself. But when they hear that, they get nauseated. Right. It's like, well, actually, by pure definition, like, bro, you kind of conservative, and I don't hate you for
it. It's like a bunch of dudes who be like stock trading, having their own small business. Y'all doing forex, like y'all are capitalists. Y'all are a hardcore capitalist. You're a little entrepreneur. Good for you. You're a strong family guy. You're a Christian. You're socially conservative. A lot of these men are not for abortion, pro-life. You know, a lot of these men especially aren't for unfettered immigration, you know, affecting the economy, affecting jobs. Like a lot of these guys are actually, black men are actually very conservative. And yeah, like you said, nobody's ever going to identify with like the Republican or right-wing label because of the anti-blackness that exists within a lot of conservatives and black conservatives.
And they did it to themselves, in my opinion.
Oh, they for sure did it to themselves. We could have, I mean, if we could have had a larger black Republican vote if Brexit didn't happen. I'm sorry to say, but this whole strategy of pandering to black people who are embarrassed of being black or think they're better than black people, say, like basically the ideology that I'm not like those other blacks. I lift myself up by my bootstraps and I have a dad. I don't like the ideology, and that's part of the reason why that there's not that many black conservatives. Yeah, it's disrespectful.
Like I physically got sick when I heard you when you said that.
You got to get off the Democrat plantation. You just got to get off the Democrat plantation.
Oh my God,
it's rude, right? It's rude.
I feel like I heard somebody say that right before they blamed God rest his soul, George Floyd, for choking himself out or kneeling on his own neck.
You blacks just have to get off the Democrat plantation and you know, start voting in your best interest.
Right.
It's blacks. When somebody says blacks, that's when I know.
Oh, the you blacks.
You blacks. You people.
Oh my goodness. Anyways, let me stop getting upset. I'm physically,
right.
I'm annoying myself. So actually, we did talk a little bit beforehand, just kind of talking about things that you are really familiar with and things that you have studied in the past. And one topic that I really felt like would be good for us to talk about is police brutality. Nowadays, you know, people are like, you know, defund the police, abolish the police. No, defund the police doesn't mean actually taking all their money. It means reallocating towards other things. And some people are just pure on abolish the police. Some people are like abolish America. And I'm like, okay, maybe that's a little too far. Where are you with that? And maybe what are some of your thoughts? What have you been seeing and what's your stance today?
So much to conservatives' dismay, I kind of do see where people who are, you know, saying defund the police are coming from. I'm not an ACAB person. I do think that there are law enforcement that are good people, but I don't think that it's possible to be a law enforcement officer and not be tyrannical, and people sign up for being a law enforcement officer knowing that they will have to enforce tyrannical laws. So it's hard for me to not see people's point when they say that. In terms of abolishing the police or not having the police force, I think that we need to redefine what the police force can and should be. So my favorite form of law enforcement is a form where law enforcement can be held accountable. So I like sheriffs because they can be elected, they can be recalled. And having a system like that, instead of departments just getting a bunch of money from the city and hiring whoever they want with no training, I would prefer a sheriff system or an electable system or even a privatized system much, much, much more over that. It's where people could like fire and hire officers at will, because at the end of the day, we pay their salaries. So why shouldn't we have control of who is protecting us or protecting us? You know what I'm saying?
Yeah, I mean, just the idea that you can get pulled out of a car by somebody who
you don't know and who you didn't hire and who you're paying. That's, to me, that's ridiculous. So policing as it is has to change. I don't disagree with the concept of law enforcement in general, but the way the system is in America, I do disagree with how it's being run. Some steps to take, you know, to get to the point where I would stop complaining about it so much is to end qualified immunity. That would help police officers being held accountable. For people who don't know what qualified immunity is, it's basically the statute that was written into law, not through legislation, not through anyone voting on it, but by the Supreme Court, which is very rare, which just goes to show how unpopular it was at the time. It was like somewhere in the mid 20th century. I don't know the exact year, but my point is that it was unpopular and no one really voted for it. It's a law that protects police officers from paying when they've been sued for breaking people's constitutional rights. So if a police officer suspects you of a crime and is like, hey, that guy's black, he matches the description, and tackles you and breaks your arm, the city would have to pay that. That comes out of people's tax dollars. Basically, you're paying your own lawsuit, and it's a really ridiculous concept, and that officer will not have to pay anything. So I would like to do away with that statute that nobody really likes, that perfects a lot of really corrupt officers. I would also like to do away with police unions. I don't think that public sector unions in general, whether it be a teachers union or any other government employee union, are good. But I think that police unions are the worst one because, again, they just protect the bad apples. And a lot of people who are pro law enforcement officer, which is fine if you are one, will say, well, there's just a couple bad apples. Well, then you should be for removing the protections for these bad apples and getting them out of the force. So, yeah, there's definitely strong opinions I have on it. I don't know everything. And I think that reform and compromise is possible, but we really have to work towards it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, I appreciate you saying that. And I've heard a lot of different things on abolishing the police and not abolishing the police and doing all sorts of stuff. And it's like, man, I don't know what the right answer is. I know for myself, I feel a little bit safer if I'm walking into the movie theater and I see a cop stationed there. I'm like, oh, okay. Maybe if something happens, maybe there's a little bit of help. Maybe. But on the other side, I maybe get a little nervous if I'm driving 5 over the speed limit and the blue lights come on and I'm like, oh, shoot, I'm strapped. I wonder if this is going to go the way I want it to go.
Maybe this is just my experience from my experiences with police, but there's literally, I cannot think of a time where I've seen a police officer and been like, thank God. Like, I feel so much safer now. I usually feel the opposite. I feel nervous. I've had several bad encounters with police officers, so maybe that's what it is. And I try not to let that cloud my judgment because I've honestly, if you knew what I've been through, you would have thought I'd been ACAB all the way. But I'm not, and that's why I try to remain objective. But I still, when it comes to like how I personally feel around an officer, or like if I see like a cop car, behind me or something, I just don't feel that comfortable.
So I think my opinion has always been a little bit different, not because I have like some great love for the police, because I really don't. It's not like that. And, for those of my friends who are serving in law enforcement, I fully support you guys doing a great job. If you don't do a great job, I don't support what you're doing, XYZ. But I've worked with kids for a long time. And oftentimes when you're working with kids, every once in a while you'll find an officer who's like, volunteering on his time off. And that's, a little bit of exposure kind of goes a long way. So it's like, okay, so there's at least one guy in this city who's trying. Is that good enough? Not necessarily. And I don't assume that every guy in a cop car is trying to ruin everybody's day. But then you see the situation that happened recently where a cop, I guess the guy was being unruly of some sorts, or maybe he said something that the cop found disrespectful. And as the suspect is handcuffed in the back of the police cruiser, he goes to hit him with the pepper spray, even though he's not any sort of threat. And as a female officer comes up behind him to try to pull him away, grabs him by his belt and tries to pull him off of the suspect who is handcuffed, sitting in the back of a police cruiser. He turns around and begins to choke her. He doesn't fully succeed, but his hands are on her throat. And it's like, oh, you're a sergeant. I don't care what kind of bad day you've had.
Completely unhinged. That is
it's insane. Unhinged. It's insane. And you see stuff like that and you're like, oh my God, like what is happening?
The craziest videos. It's so insane. There was this one viral video that's going around, and I know it's a couple years old because I remember seeing it before, but it was just resurfacing again. There was footage that came out that was self-recorded, that a bunch of police officers were standing in a hospital room punching a man who was on suicide watch and handcuffed to the bed in the face. And they were recording it,
Oh
laughing
my
at
God.
him. Obviously, they lost their jobs, but it's just we're at the point where it's like these are not normal human beings. Normal human beings should not and should just not be thinking that as a possibility. And people who are so deranged and disturbed to the point where they're beating a mentally ill handcuffed man and laughing at it and recording it for a video, they should
Wow.
not be around people. They should be institutionalized. They should never have been in the position of law enforcement. And the fact that it wasn't one, it was like two or three or four guys in the video. It's like, dang, it's a whole squad made up of these guys. You have to wonder about the culture of that police department that would allow multiple people like that.
Right. And here's the interesting thing. And I was talking to a friend after the incident that I told you about with the female officer who got basically choked out for pulling a cop off of a suspect who was not able to fight back. They said, there was a couple other officers around and they did nothing. She was the only one. And it makes you wonder, like, dang, is this the culture in that department? Every department is different. Yeah.
And
But
why he felt
is this the
comfortable
culture?
choking her in front of other people.
Right.
Like you're attacking a
Right.
woman, you're attacking a woman who's your coworker, who you're supposed to be protecting and have your back in front of all these other people who are supposed to protect you and have their back, and you feel comfortable attacking an unarmed suspect and an innocent coworker who's a female. Like you just have to wonder about the leadership, about the hiring process, about literally everything that would go on in that department.
Like, not only is that objectifiably evil, but like, what the heck, bro? Like, are you insane? You are
And
insane.
imagine
Okay.
imagine what they do at home, because I don't know about the validity of the statistic because I've seen that it may have been fact checked or debunked, but there was a statistic that was like a big chunk of law enforcement officers are domestic abusers. I don't know if
Mm.
that was ever verified. I think the statistic was from like one newspaper did a poll or one website did a poll in like the early 2000s and 90 or 90s. So I feel like it wasn't a big sample size, but you have to wonder the type of people who are constantly like brutalizing criminals and beating them when it's not necessary and pepper spraying and shooting and tasing people when it's not necessary. What do they do at home? Are they beating their kids? Are they beating their wives? You have to wonder why there are so many people with anger issues and
Yeah.
violent tendencies in law enforcement.
Right. I mean, I do get the argument where it's like, like when you get out there, it's stressful. You have a bulletproof vest on, you're wearing a gun, and you got all these tools to defend yourself in the case of emergencies. And emergencies are around every corner, especially in certain cities. I get that, but I do not get when you are in no threat of danger and you feel the need or comfortable or you're even permitted by your coworkers. Because if you snap and your coworkers grab you, okay, clearly you just snapped. It's not like this is a thing. But you snapped and your coworkers just watched. Oh no, that's just Jeff. It's Tuesday.
Right. He does this all the time. He be pepper spraying people all the time. Just leaving. This is Jeff.
Right. I
Yeah.
mean, I mean, look at him. That guy's a crackhead anyways. Like who's gonna tell? I'm not gonna tell. I like my job. So that's the kind of
Yeah.
stuff I can't support. I've had former police officer Ken Scott on here. He was a chief of police, and he came on and he said something very serious. He said, for the cops who are quote unquote good apples, if there's such a thing, people have debated me on that. You better snitch on the people that are doing the stuff that needs to be, snitched on, like for real. Because at the end of the day, if you don't, you're just enabling the system that's not getting any better, and you claim that is good.
Right. And I agree with you. There's definitely a difference between being super stressed out and you're in a stressful situation and maybe you shot someone when you should have tased someone who was charging at you with a knife or something. There's definitely a gray area in those types of very like of those situations where a police officer is targeted, stressful, in danger, in an emergency, and in between pepper spraying somebody who is handcuffed in the back of a car or beating somebody who is handcuffed in a hospital bed. Like
Mm-hmm.
I think people don't really
In a
want to
hospital
realize
bed.
that there's a difference. Like, right, like how disgusting is that? And so a lot of people will make excuses saying, well, being a police officer is such a stressful job. Police officers are targeted, and those things are both true, but you don't really see videos of any other profession. You don't see a video of a teacher beating a child who's tied to a chair. You don't see a video of like a nurse beating somebody who's handcuffed to a bed. But why the law enforcement officers? I don't understand that.
Right. And we've seen videos of law enforcement officers in school beating on not just children, but little black children. And
Right.
it's like,
I think
oh
it's children
man.
that they think that don't have a support system at home. Like it's children that they look at and think they don't have a dad that cares about him, or they don't have a wealthy family. They're not going to take me to court. Like things like that that I think make them think that little black kids, especially boys, are easier to be targeted and bullied and just pushed around in school. And even especially in these public schools, which are basically like prison pipelines anyways, it's just like a horrible cycle.
She said the P word, prison pipelines. Golly. Are you sure you're conservative?
You know what? That's where my libertarian side comes in. I've realized that my pro-black side, a lot of it is very libertarian in terms of the prison industrial complex and the war on drugs. But those also tie into things like gun rights. Now, gun rights isn't really inherently libertarian or conservative. I think both value it, but the way I view it again through a pro-black lens kind of makes it seem more libertarian because it's kind of like also a social issue as well.
Can we actually talk about that for just a second? Since this is a two-way friendly podcast, might as well touch on it for those who like this kind of thing. Can we talk about why does the basically anybody center and right of center basically own gun rights, own the Second Amendment, and anybody on the left, it's like clearly not. We even had instances where there was a gun, I think it was an online ammunition distributor. He had on his thing where he's like, if you voted for Joe Biden, click this box, or click here to say that you hadn't
Yeah,
voted
I
for him.
remember that. I
It's
remember
like,
that. I saw posts going around in the gun community because a lot of people were kind of like they just thought it was kind of sus because it was like putting out
yeah,
potential customers first of all and alienating
right.
people from the gun or like 2A movement as well.
Yeah, it's completely disrespectful, in my opinion, especially if you consider that we need everybody in the 2A space. Like, should the Second Amendment be inherently for conservatives and conservative white men? The answer is no. But, why is it like that? Like, why is it still like that, even though it's been shifting?
I kind of get what the person was trying to say because if I mean people who vote Democrat, I do think they tend to value the Second Amendment less because Democrats tend to be pro gun control. So I get what they're trying to say. Like, you voted for gun control, don't shop here. I get it. But there's a lot of people who don't really understand politics, don't understand the Second Amendment, don't really care about it. They just said, my car just got broken into, or I got followed on my way home from work and I want to buy a gun to protect myself. They're not into the political shit. So I understand why that should not be encouraged in the gun community. As for why the conservatives kind of have a monopoly on
Mm-hmm.
gun stuff or 2A stuff, I think that is unfortunate because it's not really a socially conservative or fiscally conservative issue. It's just kind of like an American principle that I think that we should all have because our country was founded on the constitutional rights to protect oneself. So I think it should be an American ideal more than a conservative ideal. But it seems that the right is just more set on conserving that American ideal, is what I would say.
Yeah, it's been really interesting because you touch on the word American ideal, and I'm kind of in a weird place now because I have a lot of people kind of talking with me, and we're going back and forth where they're like, we were talking about reparations with Larry Sharp, and reparations is a funny topic because people hear it and they're just like, oh, the blacks want reparations again. Don't they already have X, Y, and Z? And
Yeah.
I'm like, shut up, you racist. But that's just me in my head. I don't say it out loud because I'm super nice. Somebody suggested to me, it's like, hey, instead of doing like a reparation plan of money or taxes, we need to remove ourselves from this system. If they just give us a country and we could all just move to our own country. And I'm like Libya? And they're like, yeah, kind of like that, just art something else. And I'm like, okay, cool. And I've been hearing things like that, not just that specific instance where it's like basically a lot of Black Americans really are so sick of the system in general, so sick of I guess this sense of American ideals. And when they hear terms like American ideals, they consider it like a very conservative talking, a buzzword rather.
Mm-hmm.
What are we doing? I'm kind of confused at this point. It's like, are we trying to make America a better place for everyone, but especially those people who we identify with, Black Americans, or is it kind of a lost cause where we have this entire police industrial complex, military industrial complex, prison pipeline, XYZ?
In short, I don't think it's a lost cause. Sometimes I go through phases where I'm kind of black-pilled, but right now I'm trying to be pragmatic and understand that it's a slow process and understand that it takes years to undo years of detrimental harm to the Black community.
Mm-hmm.
So I've seen progress in my lifetime, and I'm pretty young, so that gives me hope. I feel like, when I'm old at the end of my life, I feel like I could look back at my lifetime and see progress, and I'm hopeful to see that. So in terms of in terms of Black people being kind of turned off by like Americanism or patriotism or things that are just like, rah, 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 American ideal, conservative, blah, blah, blah. Like, I get it. I definitely get it. But the ADOS people, the American descendants of slavery people, they have kind of found themselves in a niche where they're super pro-Black and super patriotic. And I really, really enjoy reading the commentary that comes out of that community. And I agree with a lot of it, the majority of it. So I think there is a niche in there for Black people to appreciate what their ancestors have done for this country, and also realize that they contributed to the American ideals. The American ideal was not just old white guys. There have been Black people here and Native Americans here, other people that were not white since the beginning of this country. So I think the American ideal can include anybody. That's not to say that the messaging around it includes everybody. That's definitely a separate thing. And I agree with you that a lot of conservatives paint it in a way that is not it wouldn't flow, or it's not compatible with the Black community, but that's not the case. And I think that history shows that.
Okay. Thank you for saying that, because, just adding thoughts to the conversation where, like you said, it's sometimes you kind of go into a place where you're like, dang, is it possible to fix the things that are hurting in America, as in we've been hurting for generations? Can you apologize for these things? Is any amount of reparations good enough? And that's where some people are. And I think obviously
we can forgive and not forget. I think that's the main thing, because a lot of people forget and feel comfortable. I don't think we should ever feel completely comfortable, because we see what the government can do, and they commit atrocities to every ethnic group, to every type of person, really. So I think we should see it through that lens as well, is that even though, yes, Black people were and have been singled out in this country, that doesn't mean that the government has been, all peaches and cream to everybody else too. So I think that with a healthy distrust of government and slow and steady reform, I think we can get to a point where we'll be like, you know what? Okay, it's time to move forward. We've gotten as equal as we're going to get. And no, I said equal, not equitable, because a lot of people on the left and a lot of ADOS activists want reparations to make everything equitable, and that's not really possible, because you can't really have equity without like a crazy amount of redistribution of wealth and basically like authoritarian communism. But I think we'll get to one point where we are equal. I hope it's in my lifetime. I think it'll take a long time, but again, I'm pretty hopeful for that.
Okay. Well, thanks for adding in there. So the last major thing that I did want to talk about before we wrap things up, Black voters is kind of this, we're in this weird place where if you are certifiably Black, then the Democrats want your vote and they assume that they have it. And if you don't vote for them, well, then you wearing Black. So, and then we have those who maybe vote for Republican candidates or see third parties and don't even really look into it because they feel like it's throwing their vote away and things like that. But for me, I've started to kind of look at some of these third party candidates and I'm just like, dang, it seems like the not to plug him too hard because he can talk about himself, but the Larry Sharps of the world, they seem to have the best interest of all people in mind, and they have a special place in their heart for the black community, and they actually care. Versus the Democrat Party, who seems to say they care, but when it comes to anything, you don't see any policy that's necessarily written expressly for the benefit of their black voters and constituents. And if you look back to there was an Asian hate crime bill passed basically immediately when there was even an idea or a sniff or a thought that there was, unfortunate events happening where black grannies were getting beaten in the street by random people. What are we doing? Like, how can we fix these things? Where are you with this?
I think that black people, I think it's, it's so funny that Democrats are always like, yes, black voter outreach, or, black voter participation. They're voting, they're voting, they're voting. But it's like, what are we getting? I don't think that black people should really celebrate the, higher amounts of black voting participation lately, because we're not getting anything out of it. I think that black people can demand something by withholding their vote, by voting third party, by writing in candidates, by running for office themselves. But I don't really think that we should be, by and large, supporting either of the two major parties right now. As we are in a two-party duopoly right now, I would like to see a more even split of the black vote. I do not think that we should be voting 85 to 90% Democrat all the time. If it was more even between Democrat and Republican, maybe we would see some change in this country, because they would have to fight and would have to argue and compete for our vote and have to provide us with things for our vote. But since they don't have to argue or compete for it, and the Democrats have it on lock every year, they don't have to provide us anything. So I think that withholding our vote from the Democrats, at least for a while, will cause a massive shift in how we are seen as a voting bloc in this country, especially as demographics change, how we are a small minority compared to Latinos, which are like 40% of the country now, or almost. So we're not a very large voting bloc. We're kind of almost becoming obsolete. Like, have you ever seen anyone try to pander or try to get the Native American vote? No, because they're too small of a demographic. Even though, they're a valid ethnic group in this country, they've just been wiped out and basically are politically obsolete now. And the last thing that black people need to be is politically obsolete. So I think we do need to withhold our votes from the Democrats to demand more from the Democrats and the Republicans and whoever we elect to represent us.
I was talking with a friend, and he was saying that the black community at large needs to amass wealth and power in the sense that we need to be able to do like everybody else and lobby for the things that we actually want, because clearly the just straight up voting isn't working. What are your thoughts on that?
That's the political game, and that's where politics has come to these days. I don't think that that's going to change for a very long time. I think we're going to have special interest groups and lobby groups for a very long time. So as long as that game is being played, black people need to be a part of that game.
All right. Well, last topic, something that you wanted to talk about. There's some interesting stuff happening in the NBA and around the world, specifically regarding China and things like that. What you got for me?
So a minority owner of the Warriors team, it's Chamath. It's an Indian last name. Can't pronounce it, and I'm going to try to. But Chamath, he's a billionaire. He owns 10% of the Warriors NBA team. He hosts a podcast on which, it was like about a week ago at this point, on which he said that he simply does not care about the Uyghur Muslims. Now, when pressed on the issue, like, what do you mean? I care about it. It's genocide, it's human rights violations, blah, 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 blah. He said, out of all the things, it's below my line of caring. I care about things that affect me in my country. I don't care about it. So that obviously comes across as very unempathetic. This was not really taken out of context or edited a certain way, as it was on his own podcast episode that was posted by him and his friends. So it was just really disheartening, but not really surprising to see, as we've seen from the past. The NBA makes so much money from China. I believe it's like, I think it's like 800 million yearly revenue from China, if I'm not mistaken. And I think that's about 10.
Can I get like 0.2% of that?
I think it's about 10% of the NBA's yearly revenues from China. So it's a big chunk. Money. Yeah, Chinese people really, really love the NBA for some reason, I guess. But they don't really want to talk about it. LeBron never wants to talk about it. He thinks it's all irresponsible for people to even mention the CCP or any human rights violations going on. So that whole drama happened. Then the Warriors released a statement from the other shareholders, because he is a minority shareholder. He doesn't really control the team or sit on the board or anything like that. And said that they were distancing themselves from that statement. They don't endorse it, blah, 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 blah. However, they did not say anything about the Uyghur Muslims. They didn't say we're sorry for the Uyghur Muslims. We didn't say we're against the treatment of the Uyghur Muslims. They didn't say they're against the CCP. They didn't even say anything about human rights violations at all. They just said we're against this statement, and then they didn't mention what this statement was. So again, that's not really good enough, and the NBA clearly has a biased, corrupt, and corporate interest in the Chinese Communist Party.
Incredible. No, I think that's wild, because we have a bread and butter American thing that we've all kind of enjoyed throughout the years, and then you kind of start to see some stuff where it's like, oh man, LeBron really say that? And I try not to talk badly about LeBron, because he's a great basketball player, and sometimes he gets into stuff that he really doesn't know about necessarily, but everybody's going to have an opinion, right? I mean,
yeah, I'm not a shut up and dribble type person. I think that celebrities, athletes, they can all have their opinions. Whether people pay attention to them and value them,
right?
I don't think that's necessary. But I'm not one of those people that thinks that athletes shouldn't talk about issues that are important to them. But issues that they don't know anything about, yeah, you should probably keep your mouth shut. There's a difference between being passionate about something and just shilling for something because they pay you, and that's what LeBron was doing.
Right. Though I think my question is, did this NBA minority owner, he sounded like he was talking from his heart. Like, did he feel like he was just saying what everybody was thinking, or what was he saying? Because personally, I think it's super
he really believed what he was saying. He said, I think he prefaced it by saying, "This is the cold, hard, ugly truth. No one cares about the Uyghur Muslims."
Well, now people know his name.
Right. Because it's like, and it's crazy because in his Twitter bio, I saw that he said, it said that he was the Warriors team owner, but he only owns 10%. Like, he was really heavily flexing, and he's a billionaire. He really don't need to flex like that. So I was like, why is he flexing like he's
why is he worrying himself with a podcast? Is he
right? Are you just bored at this point? Like, you're a billionaire. You got like something else to do at this point. You don't need to be talking about human rights violations and saying how much you don't care about them. If you don't care about them, don't mention it.
Oh my gosh.
Right.
Dude, are you an idiot? I saw this video talking about how to get fired via your podcast. Oh, perfect timing. Oh man. Well, I'm not a judge, jury, and execution. I'm not going to say, oh, he needs to be pulled out of his position. He needs to be you need to cancel him.
I think the market should dictate. The NBA. I don't care. I know there's a lot of people that are like, I've never supported the Warriors again. I never watched that shit ever. So I'm not calling for anyone to be fired over it. I just think it's a little bit of a mask off moment. And I don't think he would get fired anyways, because like I said, the statement from the rest of the owners of the team didn't even mention anything about the Uyghur Muslims or the CCP. So I don't think that the culture would even fire him or allow anything to happen to him in the first place.
And that makes me think, like, dang, and I'm sure everybody else was thinking this already, if not, is this what all the owners or many of the owners think? Obviously, there was a Houston Rockets owner who made some statements that got rebuked by others in the NBA when speaking against China. Is this just what a lot of those guys think? Because it's like, man, this is where our money comes from. Like, forget those Uyghur Muslims. Like, who cares? Like, let China do what they want to do. Pay us. Give us more money. We love money. We love attention. That's why I have this podcast.
I mean, that's exactly what they have to believe to even be in their position, knowing that 10% of their multi-million or billion-dollar industry is from China. Of course, they're not going to speak on it to protect their own interests, whether they actually care about it or not. I'm sure there are probably people who are like, they think it's wrong. Maybe even Chamath thinks it's wrong, but he doesn't care enough about it to do anything about it. And that's, I mean, unfortunately, that's a lot of people today. That's not just the NBA players or the NBA owners, I should say, but they're actually in a position to do something and they're not. But, the majority of Americans, would they do something if they're in the position to do something? Probably not.
This is interesting because I like that you said that, because I was listening to another interview or something like that, and the person said, like, hey, there's this theory that people who claim to have morals will only really have morals and values up until it's convenient for them. Say, are you a vegetarian? Okay, yeah. Well, would you be a vegetarian if you could only have one can of beans a day for the rest of your life versus other things? Well, then maybe not. Okay, well, um, do you hate? I think the example was, do you hate slavery? Yeah, I think slavery is awful. Well, are you going to stop buying Nikes and iPhones and things like that? Well, no, I think I'm still going to buy that. Well, do you really hate slavery? Because it's close. It's close. You only
Yeah,
care
I think
to
it's
a
easy
certain
for
degree.
people to not pay attention to ethics when they're so far removed for it, just because there's so many
Hmm.
people in between a person receiving their Amazon package and the impoverished woman in the sweatshop making their tennis shoes for 12 cents a day. There's so many people in between that, and people just like to, shut their eyes at that. And it's funny how that all ties back to working standards and human rights violations in China, anyways, because they have slaves there, and a lot of their slaves are Uyghur Muslims. So
Oof.
yeah, a lot of people don't care about Uyghur Muslims.
Yeah. No, it's really is wild because there's a lot of guys, especially in the gun community, who are like made in America all day, every day. And sometimes I get a little annoyed at that because I'm just like, guys, there are other products in the world. If it's made in Mexico and it's made right and it's actually got good features, the market will dictate. But there is some value to, I suppose, supporting your national supply chain, and also kind of distancing yourselves from countries that really don't support the same value system that you do, the same morals or ethics. As in, even when it came to COVID, we realized that, oh shoot, all our medicine is locked up in China. Like, we can't even get it. Are we done? And that was huge. And then even I'm gonna leave that at that.
Well, I agree with you. Those are good points. I think that the main reason why I'm a big, like, I try to buy things that are made in America, even if they're, a couple of dollars more expensive or whatever, is just because, I want to support my fellow Americans. I want to support our economy. One argument that I have heard for in terms of like the ethics of supporting or buying brands that are made in China that are made in sweatshops and stuff is that these people who are getting paid 12 cents a day or whatever, or like some crazy low wage, they need that and they wouldn't get paid if we didn't buy that.
Hmm.
So it's a crazy, it's definitely a conundrum, it's definitely a dilemma. But I would rather support job growth here in America than, in China. So it is what it is. That's
Yeah,
not to
I
say
had a
that
guy.
I don't buy Chinese products. There are some products I buy that you're just gonna find overseas. Everybody does it.
Yeah,
I'm not gonna act like I'm like morally above anybody else, but I think there is an argument for both sides.
yeah, I think that's true. I had a guy this podcast once upon a time who said, we need to take care of our household first, and then we can give the neighbors food. We always want to give the neighbors food, but we never want to take care of the people in our house. And he was specifically speaking about the black community. However, I think that applies to a lot of things. We talk about, warfare overseas and getting into every single armed conflict and all these different things and being an interventionalist and all these things. But ultimately, I think that even comes back to just the central message and theme that I try to really promote myself, which take care of your family. Take care of your family, take care of your community, and eventually, as you're doing those things, you'll take care of the country that you live in, and then we can worry about other things.
Right. I feel like that's kind of the basis for my patriotism. It's not like a supremacist or bigoted type thing. Like, I'm not like, wow, like, white Americans are the best thing in the world and I just love them and that's why I'm patriotic or conservative or whatever. I just love, my neighbors, my community, my fellow Americans. I don't hate anybody else. It's not what it's about. And I love my heritage and I love being an American descendant of slavery as well. I don't think that the two are mutually exclusive. Just to circle back to what we were talking about earlier about kind of the black community not really feeling that same tie to America, and there have been talks of a Liberia type situation or separation type situation. And I'm not really for that, just because I think that there is progress to be made and that it's possible here.
There you go. Well, Olivia, thank you so much for coming on the show. I know we've talked and talked, and I'm super thankful that you spent an hour with us on the show, and hopefully we can do it again someday.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.
So, how can people find you?
I'm on Instagram at rondo.olivia. My last name is Rondeau. I'm also on Twitter, and I have a YouTube channel. That's just my name. If you type in Olivia Rondeau, you'll find it.
There you go. And the Twitter is popping, of course. And I know you said you contribute on a couple different platforms. If somebody wants to find you, I guess I'd just look you up on YouTube.
So a lot of actually pretty much all of my articles are linked in my link tree. So that bio is in my Twitter bio, my Instagram bio. So if you go to that, you'll see all my socials linked, as well as my columns in different websites. So you'll see like all my Tim Pool articles there. I should probably find a way to see if I can link to my Kennedy segments there, but most of my Kennedy clips are also posted on Instagram, so you can find those there.
Excellent. Well, Olivia, keep it costly.